So good morning. My name is Shazia Khan, and today's unit that we'll be doing is Understanding and Leading Change, which is Unit 24. And today we'll be doing Learning Outcome 3. But before I go into Learning Outcome 3, let's go through quickly about what we did in Learning Outcome 2. So I'll just give you a recap of that. So in Learning Outcome 2, we looked at evaluating the impact of change on organisational behaviour. We looked at what changes and why it's so important in industry and in businesses, and how there is small changes and large scale changes as well. And we looked at the different scopes of change and how businesses adapt to change as well, because it's really important for businesses to try to adapt to change. And we looked at change, how it grows rapidly as well, like technology is a big part of change. Also, we looked at the change leaders as well. We also looked at the drivers and triggers for change and how they occur in an organization. And we looked at the different impact on management and how they respond to change. We also looked at influence organizational behavior after and during the change. We looked at the measures to minimize change, so different perspectives to dealing with change and change analysis. We looked at Bonner and Arnold and impact analysis techniques, so theories around that, academics, which we'll be looking at today as well to recap on them again. The importance of stakeholder analysis and communication in change. And we looked at Burke-Litwin's model to look at the process of change. And again, today we'll reiterate more about the theories on change as well. So we also looked at the psychological impact of change on people. So how can it affect people and the changes on individuals, groups and organizational levels. We then went on to look at the team dynamics and how people are led and managed and how that can have an impact on the organization as a whole. We went on to look at the views of change. So some people will have negative views of change, some people will have positive views of change, and how they impact on the organization. We also looked at the element of the degree and impact of change, and we looked at the driving forces for change. What are the main driving forces? Planning and dealing with organization settings, and the management concepts and how they are, how management should stay in a strong position when it comes to change. So we looked at the element of technology, how that played a big part in any sort of change, and also the change leaders and what they play. So it was really important to look at the different types of change and how large-scale change would impact on it. So like elements of how large-scale change has an impact on any sort of organization. And we looked at how they plan for change. So how would an organization plan for some sort of change to happen and the impact on it. So now we're going to look at learning outcome 3, which is to look at investigating how forces driving and resisting change influence leadership and decision making. So what is the impact of leadership on change, and how would people resist change? The learning outcome the indicative context for learning outcome 3 is to look at different levels of resistance. So again, we're going to look at group and organizational level. We're going to look at Sean's organizational culture, self-efficiency perceptions and situation resistant when determining barriers, and the use of force field analysis to understand. We look at leadership and decision making. So leadership ethics for effective decision making, respecting and valuing diversity, values and ethical beliefs, speed of change, preemptive and proactive, or responsive and reactive. And we look at the impact of scope on change on decision making. So the key terminology, so what are barriers to change? So barriers to change are elements of the impact, whether it's got a negative impact or a positive impact on the individual. So there's a lot of change that happens within a business. And there are barriers to change that impact on it. And it could be things like, people have lack of understanding, they have lack of communication, and, they have elements of, lack of clarity, poor communication. That is a barrier to it. Why is it important to understand barriers to communication? So understanding them is really important within any organization, and making sure that, people are communicated to properly. People are, the project is executed to the people properly. There's clarity, because people need clarity. Lack of management and lack of active participants is a barrier, and you need to make sure that you are breaking through these barriers, and companies understand these barriers and try to implement resources to prevent any sort of barriers coming in place. What are the common barriers? Poor or efficient communication, as we mentioned, resources or budget, cost of management. So poor communication is a big one. So make sure, you're able to communicate everything to your employees. And if there's a change of management, make sure you communicate that to everyone. The change of processes, make sure it's communicated to everyone. By organizations communicating all sorts of things to employees, they're able to adopt this culture of change then properly. So again, like I said, we're going to look at a recap of models of changes, and we're going to look again at Levin's model of change and why that is impacted on organizations in regard to preventing any sort of elements of it. So Levin, again, he was a German-American psychologist, and he has been called the founder of social psychology. He was the forerunner in organizational development and forged the term group dynamics he looked at. And he looked at the behavior and psychological process found into social groups or between them. He developed a model in the 1940s which regarded as a cornerstone of any organizational change. And it was a three-stage model, as you can see from the diagram: unfreeze, change, and refreeze. And the success of an organization change depends on how well people in the organization understand the reasons for change. That's what he wanted, the process of its implementation, and what's expected of them once the change has been made. And the first one is the most critical stage of change management process. And the aim here is to prepare the organization for change that's about to take place, which is the unfreeze part. Then you've got the change part, and this is where time to implement the change. So here the organization enters into the second phase of the transition, where the first phase has taken place. And then you've got the refreeze. And this is the third stage of the process. And this is where change has fully been embedded and the team are now working in a new way. And the key here is that it's return to stability. So, this is necessary a step, because whilst it's accepted that change is inevitable and it occurs, then new changes are more likely to happen in the future. So they need to be here in this stage, the refreeze stage is there needs to be positive affirmations that the change was worthwhile. So, to ensure that, there's training in place, make sure that, it's important to communicate everything. And then we've got the next model, which is Kotter's 8 change model. And this model has 8 steps in it. And it was this Kotter's model is where it's a framework that provides a path for organizations to overcome the barriers to change, success based on research. And it was a breakdown of Kotter's 8 change model. And this is a popular management model. It empowers organizations to accelerate organizational change through proper planning, mobilizing employees and removing friction, and instituting change in a company's culture. The process enables companies to overcome challenges, if there are any challenges faced by constant change, and implementing new technology, changes to organizational structure or new product lines. So this was one that's used a lot by organizations as well to implement that. Then we've got the ADCAR model, another really famous model that's used by lots of institutions and a lot of organizations in regards to the model. And this model, the ADCAR model, is a goal-oriented change management model that focuses on managing change at the individual level. ADCAR stands for awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement, representing the 5 key stages individuals must go through to adopt and sustain change successfully. The ADCAR model provides a structured approach for organizations to guide employees through the change process, ensuring that they understand the need for change, so why they understand why the change has to come about and are motivated to support it and have the necessary knowledge and skills that can sustain the new behaviors long term. So, the first bit of it, the awareness, and this focuses on making individuals understand why the change is necessary. Then the D part of it is, after building awareness, fostering a personal desire to support and participate in the change is essential. The knowledge part of it refers to providing the information and training necessary for individuals to know how to change. And the A part of it, the ADCAR acronym, is while knowledge equips individuals with the know-how, ability ensures they can apply it in real life situations. And then reinforcement is the last one. To sustain the change, reinforcement is necessary. The next one is the Bridges transitional model, and this is another model that's used quite a lot, and it's a framework that guides organization through the process of transitioning. So this was introduced by someone called William Bridges, a prominent organizational consultant, and he was, in his book, looked at making the most of change, so why change had to occur, why there was a need for different, when coming to transitioning, this was a need for elevating that, and it involves 3 stages: neutral zone, new beginning, and the ending, neutral zone, and new beginning, and it emphasizes the element of transition here. We've got the McKinney's 7S model, change model, and this looked at identifying and analysing the impact of change as one of the keys to effective change management. It helped to avoid, at least minimise, the disruptive impact of change and support the positive aspects of it. And there were 7 elements of it: structure, strategy, shared values, skill, system, shared values, style, and staff. And these are all highly interconnected with each other. If change leaders fail to create a well-rounded action plan to restore the balance of a company, it will fail to adapt changes in its environment. Then these are some of the main business models that we've looked at. So we've looked at the business process re-engineering, BPR, which is a model that focuses on radically redesigning business processes to achieve dramatic improvements in performance and efficiency. Then we looked at Levin management, agile management, blue ocean strategies. So these are some of the strategies you can look at in that diagram: platform, business model, and subscriptions business model. Excuse me. These are several change business models that organizations adopt in order to transform their operation and create new revenue streams. Why is it important, Keith, to have different models in place? Does every organization fit into one model? Is it important to have different ones in place? Yeah. Different ones work differently, and the theories work differently for different organizations. So there's different levels of resistance, okay? Individual, group, and organizational levels, okay? Resistance can change. People are resistant to change. People don't want to change and is reluctant by a lot of people. They struggle to adapt to change. Individual level is where employees can convert the changes to organizational changes, and this occurs when employees resist change based on their unique perceptions, personality, and their needs. Factors like job security, habit, and economic factors massively influence individual resistance. And group level resistance is where, at the group level, resistance change can occur where members of a group have the shared belief. They all are threatened by the change, so they will be resistant to that change. Then you've got the organizational change level resistant, and that is an organization tendency to resist change can be and want to maintain the status quo. Companies that suffer from organizational resistance become inflexible and cannot adapt to environmental or internal demands for change. Some signs of organizational resistance include internal power struggles, poor decision making, unconfident leadership, and bureaucratical organizational structures. So, there are different elements of change, where employers have lack of confidence. It could be elements of, emotional responses. It could be lack of training, resources. There are different parts of, elements that have an impact on an organization. So next one is Shen's organizational structure. And overall, Shen's model emphasizes the importance of understanding the underlying values and assumptions that shape an organization's culture, as their factors can be very powerful or influence on behavior and decision making. And by identifying and addressing these underlying factors, organizations can create a more positive and productive culture that supports their goals and values. And he describes psychological safety as an essential for people to overcome defensiveness and learning anxiety at work, particularly if they've made a mistake or something has gone wrong. He said that psychological safety allows people to focus on shared goals rather than self-protection. And he had 3 elements in his triangle: artifacts, exposed values, and underlying assumptions. So artifacts, the first one, these describe an overt, visible, describable aspect of the organization. Think things like branding, logos, office design, dress code, policies, and tools, things that you can see. Then you've got espoused values, and this is how people would describe the organization in current or aspirational terms. These include missions, goals, value statements, and social contracts. Then you have the underlying assumptions, and these are unconscious, unspoken, hard to articulate elements of the organization, particularly from within. They include the real but unspoken aim of the organization and underlying beliefs about quality, speed, or safety of the organization. So as we've looked at one, the artifacts and behaviours, as we mentioned, could be like your dress code and things like that. Example, an organisation might have a dress code that requires employees to wear formal business attire, indicating the organisation values professionalism and a certain level of formality in interactions with clients. Espoused one, like we said, this is values, beliefs, and goals. An example of that may have a mission statement to emphasize a commitment to sustainability and environmental responsibility, indicating that the organization values these principles and seeks to integrate them into its operation. And then underlying assumptions is beliefs, deep-seated beliefs and assumptions that underline an organization's culture. And here is an example: an organization may have an underlying assumption that the most important goal is maximizing profits, even if this goal conflicts with other values or goals. So self-efficiency, perceptions, and situational resistance when determining barriers. Self-efficiency is all about your belief in your own abilities, and it pertains to dealing with various situations. Self-efficiency can play a big role in your life, impacting not only on how you feel about yourself, but also how successful you might be. Self-efficiency perceptions refers to individuals' belief, and it's a hot topic with educators and psychologists looking at it, and how self-efficiency is critical important when it comes to protecting yourself against psychological stress. So it could be an individual who believes that changing their diet to improve their health would be difficult, or that they lack the necessary willpower that may be resistance to making that necessary change. It could be someone who's, smoking and thinking that, if I stop smoking, that, it won't change anything, so it's your own perception, it's you, protecting yourself against any psychological psychological impact that it's going to have on you, or stress. So it could be education, it could be family, it could be professional, it could be social, it could be, anything that will help you prevent that. And there are tools in place that protect that, and make sure that you protect yourself. Then you have things like situational resistance, and this is external factors that organizations, policies or resources that are in place that may have an impact on it. So, that could be if an organization has a policy that prohibits people from working remotely at home, this may hinder efforts to implement telecommunicating program. And in this case, addressing situational resistance may require changes to the organization's policy. They may have to implement new changes. They may have to, compared to before, they may have to put in changes that would identify, elements of working at home remotely. Overall, addressing both efficiency perceptions and situation resistance can be key to overcoming barriers, change and successful outcomes. But by identifying these factors, individuals and organizations can create a supportive environment that facilitates positive change. It's difficult sometimes, to put all this in place, as it impacts on your psychological stress, and you try to implement these changes, but sometimes it's quite hard. So barriers to individual level or group organizational level. So you've got individual level, which we looked at: individual business, resistance to change due to the focus of uncertainty, group barriers and organizational barriers. And this looks at the individual barriers, group barriers and organizational barriers that you can have a look at in your own time in this diagram, because it's quite helpful to identify barriers when it comes to doing your assignment. And there's there are other barriers that can play a part, any barriers that that play a big impact on an organization? Keith, any sort of barriers? Sorry? Can't hear you, Keith. What did you say?
I'm saying source of funds.
Yeah, how could that impact on an organization?
New development project coming up, no funds.
Yeah, I mean, lack of change as well. People don't always want to change. There's inadequate training and support, poor communication. People don't want to change, and, people want to try to stay the same, and that causes a big issue. The next one is looking at the use of force field analysis to understand likely opposition and change. So force field analysis is a method for listing, discussing and assessing the various factors for and against the proposed change. What is force? So it uses his work as a psychologist, and it's a structured approach that identifies the forces that drive or resist change. Force field analysis can improve the quality of decision making for both simple and more complex decisions. It is evaluating a go, no-go decisions and ensuring effective change. In the modern world, it is used for making and communicating decisions about whether to go ahead with change or not. It frames problems in terms of factors or pressures that support the status quo and those pressures that support change in the desired direction. So the driving forces, there's two sets, driving forces and restraining factors. So driving forces are forces to support and propose change, as we mentioned. And then restraining factors, these are things that identify that oppose or resist to proposed change, so restraining them. So the force field analysis was implemented by Kurt Levin and is a method for listing, as we said, and various forces to propose change. And Levin's force field analysis identified is a powerful tool used to understand what's the need for change in both corporate and personal environments, so it identified that. And to understand the concept of force field analysis, you need to be looking at why there was a need to identify and put this in place. And he described the experiment in a diagram. So first one is driving forces, positive forces for change, and restraining forces, obstacles to change. So what he said was, before the force field is an equilibrium between forces favourable to change and those resisting it. And he spoke about the existence of quasi-stationary social equilibrium. And for change to happen, he said that the status quo or equilibrium must be upset, either by adding conditions favourably to the change or by reducing them. And what he proposed is that whenever driving forces are stronger than restraining forces, the status quo or equilibrium will change. So he looked at the analysis and he looked at distinguishing which factors within a situation or organisation drive a person towards or away from the desired state and which oppose the driving forces. So that was his analysis in regards to that. To conduct a force field analysis, there's following steps to look at. And this is looking at the element of Levin's identifying. And, as we said, it's a decision-making and problem-solving analysis by Levin, and he identified the key concepts, driving forces and restraining forces in it, and equilibrium. And he said how you'd conduct it. First, you'd define the objective of the change project, so define the change, and look at that. Secondly, you'd identify the driving forces for the change. So you'd look at what are the factors that support the expected outcomes. And in Levin's model, they are considered a positive influence and can be things like internal or external factors. Then thirdly, he said, identify and list forces pushing against the change. So forces against or restraining forces are factors which resist the change and make it harder for you to retain your desired outcomes. And then fourthly, it was to assign each force an impact score, where each force has a varying degree of influence on the expected outcome. And to accommodate this score, each individual's restraining and driving force score from the weakest to the strongest. And then number 6 was to develop strategies. So effective organizational change involves strengthening the driving forces and limiting, weakening the restraining forces that oppose the change. And then also to create a management plan as well, to put a plan in place to rethink the strategy and leverage a proven change management model. So make sure the management model in place is good change the management models frameworks to help plan and implement a new project. So the force field analysis is, an element of tool that is used to change, look at the planning, look at the risk assessment, and look at how organizations, work, and if the elements of it, and the benefits of force field analysis is that it provides a structured approach to decision making by identifying and visualizing the driving and restraining forces for change. And it also helps any sort of organizations assess whether a change is feasible, to develop targeted strategies to overcome any resistance and enhance decision making by clearly mapping out factors. And there can be challenges with any model, but this analysis works well for some organizations. So leadership and decision making. So the role of leadership in any organization, leaders are not individuals who guide their teams. They're also navigators who cross roads responsible for steering the organization towards, to be a good leader. Leaders must balance input from various sources. So good leaders consider the perspectives of their team members, take on board what their team members say. It's important to be able to communicate with your team members and take on board what they say and try to implement that. Leaders should be decisive. So whilst it's important to gather information and seek input from others, leaders must ultimately make decisions and can lead to missed opportunities or create confusion. So, leader must be an effective leader as well. So again, looking at it, effective communication is part of leadership skills. Making sure that you're communicating everything to your employees, making sure that you're communicating everything in a timely manner, and making sure, that communication is a huge part of, leadership role, and putting it in practice and starting, talking, communicating with your employees. Leaders must be adaptable. So as the society is changing, as things are changing, leaders must be fast-paced and adapt to the change, and quick on their feet to think about decisions that they make. They are there to, make decisions on certain elements, and leaders should be ethical. So leaders must consider the ethical implications of their decisions and prioritize doing what's right for their organization, customers, and employers. Overall, an effective decision making is critical. Leaders and the ability to make tough. So, you need a good leader in place. Why do you think having a good leader would help the organization, Keith? Why do you think good leadership skills and having a good leader will help the organization?
To improve better relations.
Sorry, I can't hear what you're saying.
To make better decisions.
Yes, to make better decisions, to get their workers involved as well, their employees, to improve the workplace productivity, and to establish this trust with your employees. Good communication, is really good for any organization, and for a leader to communicate with its employees is the best thing. I will say, though, there's not many organizations that, have good leaders as well. It's very hard to find sometimes. So leadership ethics for effective decision-making, respecting and valuing diversity and ethical beliefs, that's really important part of any organization. Ethical leadership is really, really important. They need to take on board, ethical leadership is a style of leadership that prioritizes models, principles, and values in decision-making and behavior. And ethical leadership means directly involve individuals or organizations in a way that you respect their values and their morals and transparency, and be fair. Respecting and valuing diversity. So leaders should embrace diversity, follow an inclusive environment, and value people's backgrounds, and adopt ethical behaviors, fostering this kind of workplace culture which is transparent, inclusion, and collaborative. You need to make sure that you are, both demonstrating appropriate conduct both inside and outside the workplace. For example, Upholding ethical values, so leaders should model ethical behavior and uphold organizations and the code of value. They should uphold themselves. Promoting transparency, so leaders must demonstrate ethical leadership by, as we said, respecting and upholding ethical values. Ethical leaders inspire their teams. They create a culture of respect and foster a sense of psychological safety. The importance of ethical leadership cannot be overstated, as it has been direct impact on the well-being of employees, customers, and the organization as a whole. Having this ethical leader helps you improve your organizational, customer, how you react with customers, promoting transparency and honesty, which we mentioned, to your stakeholders, to your customers, to the public outside, making decisions based on ethical principles. So leaders should consider the ethical implications their decisions make and prioritize doing what's right for the organization, the customers, and employees. Developing a culture of ethical leadership, as we mentioned, ethical leaders are the cornerstone of a workplace culture, ensuring that considerations are the forefront and every decision. Ethical leaders must ground themselves into leadership ethics and moral principles that favor the right over the wrong, so fairness over equality, integrity over deceit. So, they should be, ethical leaders should be fair, as we said, trust and communication, respect, humanity, integrity. Ethical leadership is valued for positive impact on an organization's success, employee engagement, well-being, and social responsibility. Organizations that practice ethical leadership experience higher productivity and lower turnover, as ethical leaders foster a positive workplace. So having this positive workplace, increasing the sense of belonging, better retention, better morale would increase, this relationship between your employees and employers. Speed of change, so preemptive and proactive, or responsive and reactive. So positive, the speed of change is faster than ever. It keeps growing. Organizational companies are thriving to, change things and, have a proactive change management in place as well. And change occurs in different, organizations, internal, external. You've got reactive, you've got first proactive change management, and that is a forward-thinking approach that involves anticipating potential changes and planning for them in advance. So having them in place already, and this strategy focuses on things like long-term planning, maybe risk assessment, continuous improvement. Organizations that adopt a proactive approach to change management aim to stay ahead of by identifying different trends, potential impacts, and implementing strategies to address future changes. Proactive change involves regular monitoring of the external environment, ongoing assessment of organizational needs, and strategic planning to change effectively. And this approach fosters a culture of adaptability, resilience, enabling organizations to respond to change more smoothly. Then we've got the responsive and reactive change. Reactive change is a strategy that involves responding to change after they occur rather than anticipating them. This approach often involves immediate action to address unexpected situations, problems, or crises. Organizations that rely on reactive change management tend to focus on short-term solutions to mitigate impact of sudden change. While a reactive approach to change management can be effective in managing crisis and urgent issues, it has its drawback. This often leads to higher stress levels, lower employee morale, and increased resistance to change. So there are advantages and disadvantages of it. And within an organization, you should be able to adapt to the change of continuous change, and also develop the, make sure that, a change management process is in place for overseeing any sort of implementation of planning, evaluation of changes, and ensuring that it's an effective organizational goals are put in place. while proactive change management offers numerous advantages, including planning, stress levels, and long-term, reactive change management is essential for addressing immediate issues and crises within an organization. The impact and scope, or that the scope of change may have on decision making, responding to barriers of change. So, you know, what's having responsive. So the impact of change, what are the barriers to change? The scope of change refers to extent of the complexity of the change. So, you know, how severe the change is for everything to change. Barriers can arise, as we said, internally and externally. And so it might be things like resource allocation or risk management. And how you'd overcome these barriers is, you know, change, maybe listen and understand things, and the element of decision making. So the scope of change can affect decision making in several ways. Leaders must consider the impact of change on the organization resources, culture, and stakeholders. So, you know, as the employers, because some employers resist to change, you know, employers must be able to, you know, have processes in place to, you know, prevent employers from quitting, or to reduce any sort of resistance to change. Offer training courses, offer support to employees to adapt to that change, because, you know, and it also makes them develop new skills. So you need to make sure that, you know, you are able to get employees to develop new skills, and, you know, try to resist that change, because some employees will resist change. And to remove barriers, you know, effective communication is the biggest part of it, to navigate any sort of resistance, and fostering an understanding in stressful change initiatives. And convey, you know, if you're communicating to staff members, convey the importance of this change to them. Also, barriers to change can include resistance from employees, as we mentioned, lack of expertise, cultural obstacles, and, you know, responding to these barriers, you know, it's really important. Leaders must address these barriers and prevent any sort of elements of, you know, employers, you know, leaving. You know, even if they're resisting change, make sure that, you know, you have, or try to overcome these barriers, because, you know, it is a big thing within an organization. But, you know, trying to overcome barriers, you know, trying to you know, make sure you've provided enough training and support for the individual so that the change can come, putting you know, models in place to overcome this change, like maybe use the ADHE model, which resists organizational change. Maybe create a communication plan with them, you know, so that you involve those most impacted. So employees that are impacted on it, provide training for new processes or any sort of software. You know, it's really important. And prioritize your change for opportunity. And resistance to change is a common barrier. You know, people don't want the change to happen. So involve your employees, and get them to communicate that with them and get them involved. Ask them, you know, why does this change affect you? Change management is another process that involves planning, implementing, you know, and get your monitor, you know, and measuring success is a crucial part of change initiatives, making it easy for the employers for the change to occur. So now we've finished learning outcome 3. The next learning outcome we're going to do is learning outcome 4. So these are the references for learning outcome 3. I'll just give you a quick summary of what we've done in learning outcome 3, which is today's session. So we've looked at the element of change, again, understanding, investigating how forces driving and resisting change influence leadership decision making. We looked at barriers and resistance to change at different levels for individual, group, and organizational level. We looked at Schen's organizational culture model, self-efficiency perceptions, and situational resistance when determining any sort of barriers. We looked at the use of the force field analysis to understand likely opposition and support for change. We also looked at leadership ethics for an organization and why it's so important for any organization to implement leadership ethics, because leadership ethics plays a huge part in an organization. We looked at the speed of change, preemptive and proactive, or responsive and reactive change. We also looked at the impact that the scope of change may have on decision making. So responding to barriers to change and making sure that, you know, we are implementing barriers to change and making sure that we are on top of that. We looked at the models briefly again, as we did in Learning Outcome 2. So Levin's model, Cotter's 8-change model, ADCAR model, and the Bridges transition model. And we also looked at the McKinsey 7S model in regards to organizational change and strategy. And we looked at the business process re-engineering model, BPR, the lean management, the agile management, so business models, blue ocean strategy, and the platform model. And we looked at these. So these are some of the references used. And we looked at different levels. So these references, there are some ebooks on Moodle for additional reading, and you can go on to them to get any sort of additional reading around the area. Further reading is on Moodle. There's some ebooks there that you can look at. And if you have any queries or questions, please email learnerwork@ukvarsity.co.uk. Have you got any questions now we've finished Learning Outcome 3, Keith? Keith, do you have any questions now we've finished Learning Outcome 3?
I have no question.
Okay, so Keith, the next learning outcome is tomorrow's session at 9:30, and that would be learning outcome 4, the final learning outcome. And then the next session after that, we will have the assignment discussion session. Okay, so the assignment discussion session is next week, and the assignment submission is after 2 weeks of completion of the unit. So now the unit is completed. We've done learning outcome 1, 2, and 3. The next one is the final learning outcome tomorrow, and then the assignment discussion. The assignment brief is also available for you on Moodle if you want to have a look at it. Also, these sessions, learning outcome 1, 2, and 3, are recorded and available on Moodle for you. So if you want to go through them again, have a look at any sort of models, or look at the different levels of resistance or organizational any sort of elements of, you know, different models, you can have a look at them as well. But there will be additional reading for you to go on to, okay? So if you've got no questions, thank you for attending today's session, and I will see you in tomorrow's session. Is that okay? See you tomorrow, Keith. Bye. Bye.